The engines purred softly beneath the clouds as the golden glow of the sunrise bled into the cabin. First class was hushed, lined with silk suits, diamond rings, and entitled glances. I had just adjusted my seatbelt when I heard the sharp voice of the flight attendant. "Sir, I believe your seat is at the back." The man she spoke to was a tall black gentleman, dressed in a modest suit, carrying nothing but a worn leather briefcase. His posture was calm, too calm for the storm about to brew. "No," he said, voice even, "seat 1A. It's on my ticket." The whispers began immediately. A man in a navy blazer snorted. A woman clutched her pearls. And then came the push. Two men, both first-class passengers, stood glaring at him. "We paid for peace here," one hissed. "You people don't belong in this section." Before he could answer, they grabbed his arm. The flight attendant, torn between duty and pressure, muttered, "Sir, please step aside until we clarify." He didn't resist. He simply looked at them, one by one, his eyes calm, yet ancient, like someone who had seen this scene too many times. They forced him down the aisle, past the curious stairs, into economy, where knees pressed into seats and the scent of cheap coffee lingered. Beside me sat a young woman. Her name, I'd learn later, was Maya. She whispered, "Did you see how they treated him? Like baggage, not a person." I nodded, unease twisting in my chest. There was something about him. The way his fingers tapped the armrest, the briefcase never leaving his grasp, his gaze not of shame, but patience. Minutes passed. The captain's voice came over the intercom, routine and bored. Drinks were served. And then, turbulence. Not in the air, but in the whispers. The man's briefcase had slipped open slightly as he bent to place it beneath the seat. Inside, I saw the corner of a document, a seal glinting faintly in the light. Presidential. My stomach tightened. A crew member approached, curious now, her voice softer. "Sir, may I confirm your name again?" He looked up slowly, and for the first time spoke it aloud. The cabin fell silent. A name heavy with history. A name whispered in newsrooms and boardrooms. A name tied to a $50 million government contract recently signed to rebuild the nation's failing hospitals. Suddenly, first class looked very small. The two men who had dragged him moments ago were now pale, their hands frozen mid-drink. The woman with pearls removed her sunglasses. "Is that him?" someone murmured. The crew scrambled. The attendant's smile was stiff now, almost breaking. "Sir, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. Please allow us to return you to your seat." But he didn't move. His voice was calm, but it cut through the air. "You dragged me in front of everyone, made me less than human for a seat I paid for. And now you want me to sit in silence while this plane carries the same people who laughed at me minutes ago?" Eyes turned. Tension thickened. Maya clenched her fists beside me, whispering, "Say something. Make them hear it." He slowly stood. "No, I'll stay here, because this is where your truth is loudest." And just then, an alarm. A choked gasp from the front cabin. The man in seat 1B, one of the ones who had shoved him, was clutching his chest. Panic rippled through the plane. The attendant shouted for medical help. People froze, useless in their fear. The black gentleman placed his briefcase on the seat, knelt beside the gasping man, and, with practiced hands, began chest compressions. His voice calm, commanding. 30 in a row. Keep the airway clear. His movements were swift, his technique perfect. In that moment, the labels peeled away. He was not a passenger, not a target. He was a savior. The pulse returned, weak but there. The whispers changed tune now. Respect, awe, guilt. And then, as the man gasped for air, the savior stood, dusted his suit, and said only, "Next time, see the person before you see the seat." The cabin was thick with a guilty silence. The man who had been shoved, humiliated, was now the only reason one of their own still had a pulse. I watched as the paramedics on the ground prepared for an emergency landing, the crew fumbling with apologies that came too late. But he, the man they had cast out, didn't speak again. He simply sat in the narrow economy seat, the same one they had forced upon him, hands folded over his briefcase. His eyes weren't angry. They were unreadable. When the plane finally landed, chaos met us at the gate. Reporters, cameras, flashes. They weren't here for the collapse. They were here for him. A reporter shoved a microphone past the flight crew. "Sir, is it true you're the one who will testify tomorrow?" The name clicked in my head now. Not just a name tied to contracts, but a name tied to a congressional investigation about racial discrimination in national aviation companies. He wasn't just a passenger. He was the federal inspector whose testimony could shut down 3 major airlines. And we had just witnessed the kind of proof that needed no courtroom. The 2 men who had mocked him earlier tried to disappear into the crowd, but it was too late. Phones had recorded everything. Their insults, their hands dragging him like luggage, the very seat he was denied. Their faces were already flooding the news feeds. He turned slowly, looking at the gate, the crowd, the cameras, and then at us, those who stayed silent. His voice was calm, cutting through the noise. "Today, you didn't just drag me from a seat. You dragged your own reflection into the open." Maya beside me whispered, "He planned this. He knew this would happen." But as we followed the crowd, I realized, no, he hadn't planned it. He had endured it, again and again, until the world finally saw. Suddenly, a child ran from the gate, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. "Dad!" he shouted, his voice piercing through the murmurs. The man knelt, opening his arms. The boy leapt into them, tears streaking his cheeks. "I saw what they did, Daddy. I saw it all." And in that embrace, the cameras caught something no headline ever could. The weight of generations and the quiet resilience that refused to shatter. The CEO of the airline arrived, pale and breathless. "Sir, we are deeply—" The man raised a hand, silencing him. "Save your apologies. Save your statements. I don't want your upgrade. I want your system to change." Then he turned to the cameras and said something I will never forget. "You cannot teach dignity from a first-class seat. You teach it from the ground, where they threw me." The flight crew looked away. The passengers shifted uncomfortably, hiding behind designer bags and sunglasses. But the world had already seen. By evening, the footage went viral, not because a black man had saved a life, but because he had refused to be quiet about the hand that pushed him down before he rose up. Weeks later, the airline released a new policy, apologizing publicly. Lawsuits were filed, faces were fired, and that man, he didn't ask for a single dime. Instead, he founded a scholarship for young aviation engineers of color using the attention they tried to shame him with. And I, who said nothing that day, learned a lesson that still haunts me. The loudest silence is the one that lets in